Hey guys, what is up? It's Ro here coming with you today with something RxC, and today we're going to be going through, it's going to be some different programming basics on how to build somebody's deadlift. Now there's a couple of different things we want to think about when we're thinking about building up somebody's deadlift, and some of these things are technique and what approach we're going to take to building up that deadlift. The deadlift can be really tricky for a couple of different reasons. The first reason being, the deadlift is a movement where if you change somebody's technique, you can vastly increase how much they're lifting from the movement. A lot of people don't really spend as much time as they need to or as they like to really building their solid foundation on technique on a deadlift, and maybe not exploring as many different variations of the deadlift as they could. Now here we're always referring to a conventional deadlift. We're not referring to doing a sumo deadlift or any other variation. This is just a traditional two hands outside of the knees, not hands inside of the knees like a sumo variation. So the first thing is going to be technique. Figure out what sort of technique somebody's using. So if you just focus over here, now I'm going to show you a couple of different variations. So we've got three main variations that you'd see in a deadlift. You'd have something that looks more like a clean deadlift, where you've got somebody whose hips are lower than their shoulders, whose hips are lower than their knees, and they're using their legs a lot to lift the bar up. We've got a almost stiff-legged deadlift, where somebody's got their knees fairly vertical, their hips are higher than their knees, the shoulders are over the bar, and it becomes a very hamstring dominating type movement. So hamstring, glutes, and lower back, all these get fired up in this sort of variation. And then there's a deadlift that sort of meets in the middle, where you kind of have somebody whose hip maybe isn't super high, not too far away from their knee, their shoulders are just directly over that bar, and it's not quite as exaggerated as this version, and it's not quite as exaggerated as this version. So you have somewhere in the middle. So the first thing is going to be figure out what technique you'd like to use from that deadlift. The next thing we want to try and look at is going to be what approach are we going to take to improve the deadlift. Are we going to take a compound approach or an accessory approach or a mixed approach? Cool, so these are just terms that we're kind of throwing around here, but basically for the most part, a compound approach is basically, think of the Smolov squat series. So if you've ever tried the Smolov program, basically you use squatting to improve your squat. So a compound approach would maybe refer to using the deadlift to improve your deadlift. So here you'd be working on percentage work, you'd be doing a lot of maybe lighter weights, building up some volume to improve your 1RM. So this is what's most common, all right? I'd definitely refer this as the most common approach. Now a second variation of this is going to be doing some accessory work. So here we have things like back extensions, rack pulls, and deficits. So using accessory movements to improve the compound lift. So all of this sort of stuff here is going to add up to building up that 1RM, which is a different approach to take. It may be even not a west side type approach, but just an approach where you're really mixing a whole lot of different exercises to improve that main lift. And then you've got a mixed approach where you're using a little bit of this, right, and a little bit of that, and it becomes kind of like a 50-50 or 60-40 type approach, where you're using some accessory work and using some compound lifts. Now things to take into account for a deadlift is figuring out the weakness is going to be the most important part. So the first thing we're going to figure out is one of two things. Do you struggle with the pull off the ground, or do you struggle with the lock? Alright, so if you struggle with the pull off the ground, we need to assess why you're struggling. And a lot of the initial pull that you get from that starting position of the deadlift comes from your hamstrings, comes from your back, comes from being able to use your legs. So you have to try and assess, am I pulling, am I in a good position, could I make my hamstrings stronger, could I make my lats stronger, could I make my grip stronger, all these sort of areas, and try and tackle those. The next thing you want to try and address, what's my lockout like? So a lockout would look like this when we're grabbing onto that bar, and we're trying to just finish that pull, but we just physically can't. And what you see often is people bring their knees forward. Really what's missing here is hip extension power. So people are struggling to lock out their glutes. So if you're struggling with the lockout, you'd be addressing glutes, hips, all of this sort of area. Cool, and that just kind of gives you a basic idea of like, all right, is it the pull, is it the lockout? Now from there we can try a couple of different things. If you're struggling with the lockout, you can try rack pulls. And this is just really sort of basic stuff that just to give you an idea. So a rack pull is basically, instead of deadlifting from the ground here, you'd be deadlifting from maybe racks, and you'd be just a little bit higher up rather than quite as low. So you've got the bar sitting there rather than quite as low. So instead of pulling from the ground, maybe you're pulling from just below knee or just above knee and just working on that hip extension area. Now a different approach to this would be pulling from a deficit. If you're really struggling from the pull from the ground, maybe you're standing on plates and maybe the bar is all the way down and the barbell's down there, so you have to pull a little bit harder from the bottom of the ground, therefore making it a little bit easier when you get to pull from an even surface. These are some of the basic things you want to think about when analysing a deadlift or an athlete's deadlift and figuring out how can you improve it to make their deadlift a little better. This is just a very broad and I guess large overview of what's involved in improving a deadlift, but these are some very basic and good things to think about that can help you, help your athletes and help your members improve their deadlifts and get PRs and gains and all that good stuff. Hope you've enjoyed this video, guys. If you're on YouTube right now, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and if you haven't already, please listen to our podcast, Something RXC, available on iTunes and Stitcher. Take care and peace.